I warned her. I begged her to slow down. The curve outside my house ices over before dawn every year. But she didn't listen. She laughed. She said I was being dramatic. She called my handmade warning sign an eyesore. Then Christmas Eve came, and so did the freeze. She hit that curve at 35, and the next sound we all heard was the crack of a power pole falling across her windshield. That morning, the whole neighborhood lost electricity, but I lost patience. This isn't just a story about black ice. It's about arrogance, about control, and about how justice sometimes arrives in silence, wearing frost. There's a hush that settles over the world just before it freezes, a stillness so complete it feels like the air itself is holding its breath. The clouds hang low and heavy, refusing to drift, and every distant sound arrives muffled, as though the sky has already laid down a blanket of snow that hasn't yet fallen. I felt it deep in my chest that evening, standing on the wide front porch of our home in Clearhaven Estates, a thermos of strong black coffee warming my hands while thin ribbons of steam curled from the rim and vanished into the cold. Inside, through the glowing windows, Emily was kneeling on the living room rug with our daughter Lila helping her wrap the last of the teacher gifts in bright paper and curly ribbon. The Christmas tree lights painted soft amber patches on the snow-dusted front steps, and for a moment, everything felt perfectly safe, the kind of safety most people take for granted. I've lived in far colder places, 3 winters north of the Arctic Circle, with the Army Corps of Engineers taught me what real cold can do. But Western North Carolina isn't supposed to be that kind of cold. Here, winter is meant to be picturesque light dustings for holiday cards, not the treacherous black ice that forms without warning. And yet, on our street it does. Our house sits at the bottom of a long, gentle slope. Runoff from the higher lots collects here, seeps into the asphalt, and freezes solid the instant the temperature dips below 28 degrees. The road is narrow, shaded by ancient maples, whose branches knit together overhead like a tunnel. It curves just sharply enough to hide what's coming until it's too late. I've watched delivery vans, fishtail FedEx trucks slide sideways into ditches, even an ambulance once get wedged against the curb until a neighbor hauled it out with his tractor. The HOA never lifted a finger. That night, the thermometer on the porch read 29 and falling. I knew what was coming. I walked to the shed, pulled out the collapsible caution sign I'd built 2 winters earlier, a sturdy plywood triangle painted fluorescent yellow, the words caution. Ice ahead. Slow down, stenciled in bold black letters that I'd traced by hand under a work lamp in the garage. It wasn't elegant, but it was visible. I carried it down to the start of the curve, right where the shadows thickened, and planted it firmly. Then I scattered my own mix of sand salt and furnace cinders across the slickest patches, a gritty blend that bit into ice better than anything the county spread. By morning, the sign was gone. I found it folded and shoved behind my trash cans, as if someone had tried and failed to make it look like the wind had taken it. The gravel I'd laid down hadn't been disturbed. Someone had removed it deliberately. That afternoon, the email arrived, crisp HOA letterhead. At the top, Karen Whitmore's looping cursive signature at the bottom. Mr. Monroe, please refrain from placing unauthorized signage on HOA-managed property. While we appreciate your concern for road safety, your sign violates our community's visual uniformity guidelines and may create confusion among drivers. Our contracted winter services will address any weather-related concerns. Kindly remove any further obstructions, or the board may need to pursue formal action. Sincerely, Karen Whitmore, HOA Vice President. I read it once, then again, feeling the heat rise in my neck. Obstruction, confusion. As if a warning could ever be either. Emily came up behind me, rested her chin on my shoulder, and read in silence. When she finished, she exhaled slowly. She's baiting you, she said. She's going to get someone hurt, I answered. Emily's hand settled gently on my arm. They won't listen, Caleb. You know that. She was right. But knowing didn't mean I could stand by and do nothing. That night, under the beam of a headlamp, I went back out into the cold. Gloves on boots crunching on frost, I hammered the sign's new steel base deep into the frozen ground and chained it to the nearest streetlight post. I didn't care about visual uniformity. I cared about the yellow school bus that crested the hill every morning at 7:12 sharp. I cared about the Amazon driver racing his route. I cared about the single mom 2 doors up who left for her night shift at the hospital before dawn. I cared about Emily and Lila. I stapled a laminated printout from the National Weather Service to the post. The official freeze warning, the predicted window for black ice formation, our street's elevation drop highlighted in red. It wasn't just a sign anymore, it was evidence. For 2 days, silence. Then, on Friday afternoon, I watched Karen's gleaming white Lexus glide past. She slowed just long enough to lean toward the passenger window, eyes narrowing at the reinforced sign and the weather data flapping gently in the breeze. She shook her head once, a small dismissive gesture, and drove on. Saturday morning brought the next email, this one broadcast to the entire neighborhood. Dear residents, please be advised that homemade weather signage is not sanctioned by the HOA and may cause unnecessary alarm. Let's keep this holiday season joyful, rather than turning it into a prepper's paradise. The roads are monitored and our professional winter maintenance crews remain on alert. Drive carefully and enjoy your weekend. Karen Whitmore, Vice President, Clearhaven Estates, HOA. She had bolded homemade weather signage and added a smiling emoji. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. It wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was reckless, dangerous. And in that moment, I understood this wouldn't end with polite emails or passive-aggressive emojis. Someone was going to get hurt. I only hoped it wouldn't be someone I loved. The morning after I chained the sign to the post, I woke early habit from years of reveille that never quite left me and stepped outside to check it. Frost glittered on the grass like scattered diamonds, and my breath hung in the air in slow, deliberate clouds. The sign stood exactly where I'd left it, the laminated weather report still crisp, the chain solid against the streetlight. For the first time in days, a small knot in my stomach loosened. Lila bounded out behind me, in her oversized boots, cheeks already pink from the cold. Is Dad's sign still guarding the road? She asked, eyes wide with the seriousness only an 8-year-old can muster. It is, I told her, ruffling her hat, and it's going to stay there. She grinned, gave the post a proud little pat, as if it were a faithful dog, and skipped back inside for breakfast. Emily watched from the doorway, arms folded, a quiet smile on her lips. In that moment, the world felt balanced again. But balance in Clearhaven Estates has always been fragile. 2 days later, on a gray Saturday that smelled of chimney smoke and impending snow, the second email arrived, this time addressed to every resident in the neighborhood. Dear Clearhaven Estates residents, it has come to the board's attention that an unauthorized homemade road sign has reappeared near the lower slope. While we all share a desire for safe streets, such personal installations are not approved by the HOA and risk causing undue alarm during this festive season. Please rest assured that our professional winter maintenance contractor is fully prepared and on standby. Let us focus on holiday cheer rather than improvised warnings that may confuse visitors or delivery personnel. Thank you for your cooperation in preserving the beauty and harmony of our community. Warmest regards, Karen Whitmore, Vice President, Clearhaven Estates, HOA. The smiley face at the end felt like a slap. I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone, coffee cooling untouched in front of me. Emily read over my shoulder, her hand resting lightly on the back of my neck. She's not even pretending to care about safety anymore, I said quietly. She's performing, Emily replied, for the whole neighborhood. And she's betting most people will side with pretty over practical. Lila, coloring at the far end of the table, looked up. Why is the lady mad at your sign, Daddy? It's helping people. I didn't have an easy answer for that. Later that morning, I walked down to inspect the curve again. The asphalt had begun to sheen over with that telltale glassy film, black ice, forming in the shadows where the sun never quite reached. Tire tracks from early commuters had already etched faint skid marks near the edge. I crouched, ran a gloved finger across the surface, and felt the slick resistance that could send a 2-ton vehicle spinning like a top. That's when I heard the sharp click of heels on pavement. Karen Whitmore was marching toward me in a tailored red wool coat, clipboard hugged to her chest like armor. Her breath came in controlled puffs, and her expression was one of practiced disappointment, the same look she wore at every HOA meeting when someone's garbage cans were visible for more than 12 hours. Good morning, Caleb, she said, the words clipped and bright. Morning, I replied, standing slowly. She stopped a few feet away, eyes flicking to the sign and back to me. I believe we were quite clear in our previous correspondence. You were clear, I said. I just disagree. Her lips thinned. The road right-of-way falls under HOA architectural and presentation guidelines. Your structure detracts from the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. I glanced at the sign, bright yellow reflective chain securely, then back at her. It's 30 feet from the HOA landscaping boundary, county right-of-way. I confirmed it with the registrar's office last year. A flicker of irritation crossed her face, quickly smoothed away. Presentation standards extend to anything visible from community property. And frankly, Caleb, it's creating liability issues. What if a driver relies on your homemade warning, assumes it's official, and still has an accident? The HOA could be exposed. Then they'd have been warned, I said. Which is more than they'll get if the road ices over tonight and nothing's done about it. She shifted the clipboard, producing a pre-printed violation notice with a flourish. This is your official citation. Continued noncompliance will result in fines assessed to Lot 37. I didn't take the paper. Karen, I said. Keeping my voice level, this isn't about fines. It's about the school bus that comes down this hill every morning. It's about my daughter on that bus. It's about every family who drives this curve in the dark. For the briefest moment, her eyes softened almost. Then the mask snapped back into place. Our contractor is scheduled to treat the roads this evening, she said. There is no need for theatrics. Then why wasn't it done last night when the temperature first dropped? I asked. Why wait until the ice has already formed? She had no answer for that. Instead, she placed the violation notice under the windshield wiper of my truck, parked at the curb, turned on her heel, and walked away, coat flaring like a flag of victory. I left the paper exactly where it was. That night, I checked the forecast again. Another cold front sliding in after midnight. I added a second bag of my grit mix to the worst patches and tightened the chain on the sign one more time. Then I stood in the dark, watching the red LED strip I'd added blink steadily against the frost, casting a rhythmic glow across the pavement. Somewhere up the hill, lights glowed warmly in Karen's windows, perfect wreaths on the door, tasteful white icicle lights along the eaves. Everything in its place. But out here on the road, nature didn't care about perfection, and neither did I. The third time they took the sign, they didn't bother hiding their contempt. I discovered it late that Sunday afternoon, dumped in the HOA maintenance lot behind the community tennis courts. The plywood was cracked down the middle, one leg snapped clean off, long gouges scraped through the yellow paint, as if someone had dragged it across gravel. It lay half buried under discarded fence posts, tangled Christmas lights, and bags of yard waste, like trash, waiting for Monday pickup. Emily found me in the garage carrying the broken pieces in under my arm. They didn't just remove it this time, I said, voice flat. They destroyed it. She studied the damage, then looked up at me. Can you fix it? I can do better than fix it. Lila appeared at my elbow, eyes round. Are the bad guys winning, Daddy? Not yet, kiddo, I told her. Come help me build something they can't break so easily. We spent the rest of the day in the garage. Lila handed me tools with solemn importance, passing screws holding the level steady, even brushing on the first coat of reflective paint. Emily brought cocoa and quiet encouragement. Together we turned wreckage into something stronger: steel hinges instead of wood, heavy gauge aluminum backing, rubber-footed legs that gripped the ground like claws. I added a solar-powered LED strip along the top edge that blinked slow and steady, visible from 200 yards, even in fog. When we finished, it looked less like a homemade sign and more like a piece of professional highway equipment. Emily stepped back, hands on hips, and laughed softly. It looks like a baby airport beacon. Good, I said. Airports don't mess around with ice. That night, under a sky pricked with early stars, I carried the new sign down the slope. The ground was iron hard, but I bored holes with a battery auger, poured quick-set concrete around steel rods, and anchored the base deep. I mounted a small motion sensor camera on a nearby tree branch, wired it to a hard drive in my office. If anyone touched it again, I'd have proof. By morning, the sign stood proud, taller, brighter, impossible to ignore. I half expected another email by noon. Instead, something unexpected happened. The neighborhood began to talk. It started with a single reply in the HOA group chat beneath Karen's latest broadcast message. Teresa Halpern. Actually, I appreciate the sign. My tire slipped on that corner just last week. It's nice to know someone's watching out for us. Then another. Diane Whitaker. Same here. That blinking light made me slow down yesterday morning. Thank you, whoever put it up. Within hours, more voices joined, quiet at first, then bolder. Mark Ellison. I drive a rear-wheel pickup. That curve scares me every winter. Glad someone finally did something. Sarah Nowen. My kids ride the school bus down that hill. I sleep better knowing there's a warning. By evening, 12 residents had spoken up. A few stayed neutral, but not one defended Karen's position. The thread sat there glowing on screens across Clearhaven Estates, a slow tide turning. I showed the messages to Emily over dinner. Lila was upstairs watching a Christmas movie, for the third time singing along off-key. "People are listening," Emily said, surprise in her voice. For the first time, I replied, but I didn't trust it to last. Karen wasn't the type to let public opinion shift without a fight. That night, I checked the camera feed one last time. The sign stood illuminated against the dark LED lights, pulsing like a heartbeat. Frost was already creeping across the road again, a thin silver skin waiting for tires. Up the hill, most windows were warm and golden. Down here, the air felt charged, like the calm before lightning. I thought about the power Karen wielded, the ability to shape rules, to silence dissent, to make people choose comfort over truth. She wasn't just protecting aesthetics. She was protecting control. And if a veteran with engineering experience could prove her wrong, if one stubborn resident on the edge of the neighborhood could force change, then her entire carefully curated world might crack. I closed the laptop and looked out at the blinking light. Winter was just beginning. And so was the real storm. The Tuesday before Christmas, the Clearhaven Estates clubhouse smelled of pine garlands, cinnamon candles, and the faint undercurrent of tension that always hovered at HOA meetings. Folding chairs had been set up in neat rows beneath the stylized oak tree seal on the wall, and the long, navy-draped table at the front looked like a makeshift tribunal. More residents showed up than usual. Parking lot, nearly full, coats dripping melted snow onto the entry mat, hushed conversations buzzing like static. Emily and I arrived early enough to claim seats in the middle. Lila had begged to stay home with a movie and popcorn. We'd happily agreed. As we settled in, neighbors I barely knew nodded in our direction, some with curiosity, others with something closer to gratitude. Diane, the nurse who jogged past our house every morning with her spaniel, leaned over from the row behind. "Thank you for that sign," she whispered. "It's made me feel a lot safer driving to my shifts." I gave her a small nod, surprised at how much those few words warmed me. Karen Whitmore sat dead center at the board table. In a deep emerald blazer, hair swept into an impeccable low bun, red nails tapping once against her ever-present clipboard. She scanned the room with the serene confidence of someone who believed the script had already been written. When her gaze landed on me, her smile was polite, thin, and utterly devoid of warmth, like a hostess greeting an uninvited guest. Jim Rourke, the HOA president, called the meeting to order with his usual soft-spoken efficiency. Minutes were approved, budget line items, rubber-stamped holiday decoration reminders issued. Then Karen cleared her throat with delicate precision. Under new business, she began, voice smooth as polished glass. "We've had reports of confusion regarding an unauthorized road sign installed near Lot 37. While the intent behind it is no doubt well-meaning, all signage must follow established approval protocols to maintain community standards and avoid potential liability." A few heads turned toward me. I raised my hand. Jim acknowledged me with a slight hesitation. "Mr. Monroe." I stood. "I'm the one who installed the sign," I said, keeping my tone calm but carrying. "And there's no confusion on my part. That curve has been a documented hazard for years. I've submitted multiple reports, 3 in writing, over the past 36 months, complete with photos and National Weather Service alerts. Nothing was done." Karen leaned forward, fingers laced. "As previously communicated, our winter maintenance contractor follows a scheduled protocol." "A protocol that treats the road after the ice has already formed," I interrupted evenly. "Last week, the forecast showed a clear freeze risk." I emailed the board again. "No pretreatment occurred until the danger had peaked. That isn't caution, that's reaction. And it's dangerous." A murmur rippled through the room. Karen's smile tightened. "Mr. Monroe, while we value your military perspective, this is a residential neighborhood, not a forward operating base. Alarmist signage is not the answer." I felt Emily's hand brush my arm, steadying, supportive. "I spent 11 years with the Army Corps of Engineers." I continued, voice low but firm. "I designed and maintained roads in conditions far worse than this. In Alaska, black ice claimed 2 soldiers under my watch because warnings were ignored. I don't create panic, Mrs. Whitmore. I prevent it." The room went still. I reached into my coat and produced a thin folder, walked it to the front table, and placed it in front of Jim. These are stills from my motion sensor camera over a 12-hour period showing ice formation on the curve. There's also the email I sent last week with the forecast and a recommended pre-treatment timeline. You'll see the board never responded. Jim flipped through the pages slowly. Karen's eyes followed his hands, but her expression remained composed barely. Then Diane stood. I drove that curve Friday morning, she said, voice steady. If Caleb's sign hadn't been there blinking impossible to miss, I would have taken it at normal speed. I felt my tires slip, even slowing down, without that warning. She trailed off, but the implication hung heavy. Mr. Halpern, a retired accountant who'd lived on the upper ridge for 15 years, raised a weathered hand. I've seen 3 accidents and at least 2 spinouts on that slope, he said gruffly. If a handmade sign is what it takes to make people pay attention, then leave it be. Another voice joined, then another. Within minutes, the tide had turned unmistakably. Residents who rarely spoke at meetings were leaning forward, nodding, adding their own close calls. Karen's pen scratched sharply against her notepad. Her smile had thinned to a line. Jim cleared his throat. Given the clear community sentiment, perhaps we table the violation notice for now and revisit winter safety protocols at the January meeting. Karen opened her mouth as if to object, then closed it again. The pen stabbed the paper one last time. The meeting wrapped up soon after. People lingered in small clusters, voices low but animated. Several neighbors stopped to shake my hand or thank me quietly. One older gentleman even asked if I'd look at the steep pitch of his driveway come spring. As Emily and I walked to the truck, she slipped her arm through mine. You made her look small tonight, she said softly. No, I replied, watching Karen through the clubhouse window as she gathered her things with deliberate calm. She did that to herself. Back home, I checked the camera feed once more before bed. The sign stood resolute LED lights, pulsing against gathering clouds. The forecast had shifted severe ice storm now likely. More eyes than mine were watching the road tonight. And for the first time in years, I wasn't watching alone. Wednesday morning brought a sharper edge to the cold. The National Weather Service upgraded the alert from watch to warning a full ice storm barreling across 3 counties, with freezing rain set to begin overnight, and temperatures plunging hard enough to turn every surface into a skating rink. For those of us who remembered past winters, the forecast felt like an old enemy knocking at the door. For others, it was just another notification to scroll past. I spent the day turning our house into a quiet fortress. Emily and I hauled extra firewood to the back porch, topped off the generator's fuel tanks, filled jugs with drinking water, and checked the sump pump twice. Lila trailed behind us like a small, determined shadow, stacking kindling in neat piles and asking serious questions about how long the power might stay out. By afternoon, the sky had lowered to a dull pewter, and the first tentative flakes drifted down scouts for the heavier assault to come. The HOA thread lit up again, but this time the message came from Jim Rourke, not Karen. Dear residents, the county has issued an ice storm warning effective tonight through Thursday morning. Please take standard precautions, especially on steeper sections of our roads. Our winter maintenance contractor will begin salting operations this afternoon. As a reminder, personal signage or obstructions on roadways are not permitted. However, if you observe specific hazards near your property, please report them directly to the board. Stay safe and warm. Jim Rourke, President Clearhaven Estates, HOA. No sarcasm, no emoji. Just straightforward information. I wondered if the meeting had finally rattled the board, or if Jim had simply grown tired of carrying Karen's tone. I replied briefly, attaching fresh weather graphics focused on our slope and offering to guide the crew if needed. No answer came, but an hour later, I watched 2 county-contracted trucks rumble through the neighborhood, spreading salt in steady arcs. One paused near our curve. The driver waved me over, and I handed him printouts of the runoff patterns I'd mapped years ago. He tucked them into his visor without comment, but the gesture felt like progress. Then Karen arrived. I was outside tightening the last bolt on the sign's reinforced base when the low hum of her Lexus announced her. She pulled alongside the curb, lowered the passenger window, and regarded me with the cool amusement of someone who still believed she held the winning hand. Still playing roadside engineer, I see she called voice light but edged. I straightened, brushing frost from my gloves. Still ignoring physics, I see. Her smile didn't waver. Just a friendly check-in before the storm. We wouldn't want any of your creative installations becoming hazards themselves. I stepped closer to her window. This sign has prevented more accidents in the past week than the HOA has in 5 years. She tapped manicured nails on the steering wheel. You really think you're the neighborhood hero, don't you? I think I'm the only one who's been paying attention. Her gaze flicked to the blinking LEDs, then back to me. You're making this personal, Caleb. You made it personal the moment you turned a safety warning into a punchline for the entire community, I said. You didn't just dismiss the risk, you ridiculed it. For the first time, something flickered behind her eyes. Irritation, maybe even unease. She glanced up the hill toward the salt truck disappearing around the bend. This neighborhood has standards for a reason, she said quietly. So does gravity. The words landed harder than I intended. Her jaw tightened and the mask slipped just long enough for me to see the anger beneath. Be careful, she warned, voice low. You think you've won allies, but people forget quickly. One mistake, one real accident, and they'll turn on you faster than they turned on me. I leaned in slightly. Then maybe you should be the one who's careful. She held my gaze for a long second, then raised the window without another word. The Lexus eased away, tires crunching softly on the fresh salt. I watched until her taillights vanished, a strange calm settling over me. The wind picked up, rattling the bare branches overhead like dry bones. Ice crystals began to sting my cheeks, tiny harmless precursors to what was coming. Inside, Emily had the slow cooker bubbling with chili, the scent of cumin and tomato, wrapping the house in warmth. Lila sat cross-legged by the window, sketchpad in her lap, drawing a cartoon version of the street snowbanks piled high, our house glowing and Dad's super sign, flashing heroic red beams across the road. She held it up proudly when I came in. Look, it even has a cape. Emily laughed, pulling me into a quick hug. Dinner's almost ready. You okay? I nodded against her shoulder, just tying up loose ends. That evening, we ate by the fireplace, the three of us bundled in sweaters and socks, the storm gathering strength outside. Power flickered once, twice, then held steady. At midnight, the freezing rain began in earnest, a soft, relentless ticking against the windows as every twig wire and blade of grass encased itself in glass. By 2 a.m., the lights went out for good. I fired up the generator, checked the heat, and sealed drafts with towels. We moved to the living room, blankets piled high, flashlights casting long shadows. Lila fell asleep, curled against Emily's side, breathing slow and even. I sat by the window, watching the road transform into a mirror under the storm's slow alchemy. The sign's solar LEDs still pulsed faithfully, a lone red heartbeat in the darkness. Somewhere up the hill, Karen's perfect house sat dark now too. And for the first time, I wondered if she was afraid. The generator's low hum was the only sound in the house when the crash came. It wasn't loud at first, just a sharp metallic scrape followed by a heavy splintering crack that reverberated through the frozen night like a tree giving way in high wind. Then came the thud, deep, sickening, final. The kind of sound that pulls you out of half sleep and plants ice in your veins before your mind even catches up. I was on my feet, in seconds, heart hammering against my ribs. Emily stirred beside me on the couch, eyes wide in the flashlight glow. What was that, she whispered. I don't know. Stay with Lila. I yanked on boots, grabbed my coat and a heavy maglite, and stepped into the storm. The world outside had transformed into a crystal cathedral. Every branch, every wire, every blade of grass was sheathed in ice thick enough to bend the pines low. The road gleamed like black glass under my beam, reflecting the flashlight back at me in fractured shards. Down the slope, maybe 20 yards below the sign, a dark shape lay canted at a wrong angle. It took my brain a moment to assemble the pieces. Karen's white Lexus slewed sideways across the lane, its front end crumpled against the base of the neighborhood power pole. The pole itself leaned drunkenly, split near the bottom. The top section folded forward across the windshield like a fallen giant. Live wires dangled hissing faintly where they touched, slush sparks flickering blue in the dark. Steam rose in slow curls from the mangled hood. I ran. The cold burned my lungs, boots slipping on the ice, but adrenaline kept me upright. As I got closer, I saw her, Karen, still belted in the driver's seat, hands frozen on the wheel at 10 and 2, face pale and rigid in the dashboard lights. A web of cracks radiated across the windshield where the pole had struck. Shards of glass glittered on the dash like frost. I banged on the passenger window with a gloved fist. "Karen, can you hear me? Are you hurt?" Her head turned slowly, eyes wide and unfocused. She blinked once, twice, then nodded small mechanical movements. No blood that I could see, but shock can hide worse injuries. "Don't move!" I shouted through the glass. "Stay exactly where you are. The lines might be live." I swept my light across the ground. One thick cable had torn free and lay across the road, insulation frayed, the exposed copper glowing faintly where it kissed wet ice. The car wasn't sparking yet, sheer luck, but the whole scene felt like a bomb waiting for a trigger. I sprinted back to the house. Emily met me at the door, Lila clutched sleepily against her hip. "It's Karen," I said. Voice rough. She hit the pole. "She's conscious but trapped. Downed live wire. Call 911, tell them single vehicle pole, down possible energized lines, no fire yet. I'm grabbing cones and the fire blanket." Emily didn't ask questions. She was already dialing. I pulled my reflective vest from the hook, snatched traffic cones and the heavy wool blanket from the emergency bin, and ran back into the night. The wind had picked up, whipping ice crystals against my face like needles. When I returned, Karen had managed to crack the passenger window an inch. Her voice came through thin and trembling. "I didn't see it. I braked, but it just slid." "It's black ice," I told her, setting cones around the live wire in a wide perimeter. "Right where the sign is. Exactly where I said it would be." She didn't answer. Her breathing was shallow, visible in quick white puffs. Headlights appeared at the top of the hill 10 agonizing minutes later. First the fire truck, then sheriff's deputy, then ambulance. Red and blue strobes painted the ice in surreal color. Firefighters moved with practiced calm, confirming the line was de-energized before approaching the car. Hydraulic tools whined as they pried the driver's door. Karen emerged stiffly, supported by 2 EMTs, a bruise blooming dark on her shoulder, eyes glassy. As they guided her toward the ambulance, she looked back once directly at me. "I'm sorry," she whispered the words, barely carrying over the wind. I stood in the strobing lights, breath fogging, and said nothing. By dawn, the neighborhood was awake. Generators growled up and down the street. Residents emerged in robes and parkas, coffee mugs, steaming in gloved hands drawn downhill by the flashing emergency lights and the skeletal silhouette of the broken pole. I remained near the sign, hands in my pockets, watching crews work. The sign itself hadn't moved an inch, steel rods frozen solid in concrete, LEDs, still blinking their steady warning against the carnage just beyond. Mr. Halpern trudged down in heavy boots, stopped beside me, and stared at the wreck for a long moment. "That could have been any of us," he said quietly. I nodded. He glanced at the sign, then at me. "Yours held." "Yeah," I said, "it did." Later, as the tow truck winched the ruined Lexus onto its flatbed, the sky lightened to a cold pearl gray. Ice-coated branches glittered like chandeliers overhead. The storm had passed, leaving beauty and damage in equal measure. Karen was gone, taken to the hospital for observation. The power stayed out. But the sign still stood. And for the first time, the entire neighborhood saw exactly what it had been trying to tell them. By mid-morning on December 23rd, the neighborhood looked like a winter battlefield, frozen in time. Downed branches littered yards, power lines sagged under their icy burdens, and the broken pole lay across the road like a felled soldier. Temporary flares hissed red around the wreck site, while Dominion Energy crews worked in bucket trucks, their voices carrying faintly over the whine of chainsaws clearing debris. Generators thrummed from nearly every driveway, a low chorus underscoring the stillness. Word traveled faster than the tow truck. Residents emerged in waves, some in slippers and robes. Others bundled for a hike drawn downhill by curiosity and the lingering strobe of emergency lights. They gathered in small clusters along the curb, coffee mugs clutched like talismans, staring at the crumpled Lexus being winched away. Whispers rose and fell like wind through the iced trees. "That's Karen Whitmore's car. She's the one who kept saying the roads were fine. Did you see the sign? It's still standing right there." I stayed near the sign, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. The solar LEDs had gone dark in daylight, but the reflective paint still caught the pale sun, throwing back sharp glints. A thin layer of ice coated everything, yet the sign's base remained immovable, a quiet testament in concrete and steel. Teresa Halpern approached, first wrapped in a quilted jacket, her silver hair escaping her knit cap. She stopped beside me, eyes fixed on the gouge in the asphalt where the Lexus had spun. I heard she's all right, she said softly. Bruised, concussed, but nothing broken. I nodded. Teresa turned to me. Your sign was 20 yards up the hill. If it hadn't been blinking all night. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Diane joined us next, cheeks flushed from the cold. I drove past here an hour before it happened, she said. Slowed way down because of the light. If I'd come through later. More neighbors drifted over. Quiet thank yous, nods, a few handshakes. No one mentioned the HOA directly, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. Something had shifted overnight, and it wasn't just the temperature. By early afternoon, the power flickered back on in fits and starts. First the upper ridge, then our lower section. Lights warmed windows again. Generators fell silent one by one. The tow truck hauled away the last visible evidence of the crash, leaving only the leaning temporary pole and a faint oil stain on the ice. But the real explosion happened online. At 4:08 p.m., an anonymous post appeared in the HOA email thread with the subject line, Re-Road Safety, the Icy Truth. No text, just 2 photographs attached. The first, my sign at night, captured from a phone, LEDs blinking crimson against the storm-black ice gleaming treacherously below. The second, Karen's Lexus, pinned beneath the collapsed pole, taken at dawn, emergency lights strobing across the wreckage. The replies ignited immediately. Leah Chen. Wait, that's Karen's car. Wasn't she the one insisting there was no danger? Mark Ellison. That's the exact curve Caleb warned about, repeatedly. Sarah Nguyen. I slowed down yesterday only because of his sign. My minivan started to slide even then. Diane Whitaker. Can we finally admit the HOA got this wrong big time? Someone compiled a quick collage screenshots of Karen's earlier emails, the prepper's paradise, jab, the smiling emoji, pasted beside the photo of her shattered windshield. It spread through the thread like wildfire. Anonymous, receipts matter. She mocked him. She removed the sign. And this happened. Teresa Halpern. Caleb did more to protect this street in 1 week than the board has in years. We owe him thanks, not violation notices. I scrolled through the messages at the kitchen table, Emily reading over my shoulder. Lila was upstairs napping off the disrupted night, exhausted from the excitement. They're turning on her, Emily said quietly. She turned on herself, I replied. The road just delivered the consequences. At 7:14 p.m., Jim Rourke posted the final message of the night. Dear neighbors, in light of this morning's incident and the serious concerns raised about roadway safety, the board will be reviewing our winter response policies and guidelines for resident-initiated safety measures. We are profoundly grateful no one was seriously injured and extend our thanks to those who have worked proactively to keep our community informed. We ask for continued patience and respectful dialogue as we move forward together. Jim Rourke, President, Clearhaven Estates, HOA. No mention of Karen, no apology, but the careful wording spoke volumes. Her name was absent from the thread after that. Her silence rang louder than any scream ever could. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. The temporary pole stood crooked against the darkening sky, a stark reminder. The sign's LEDs had recharged in the weak daylight and blinked steadily once more, guiding no one tonight but ready. Emily slipped her arms around me from behind. It's over, she said. No, I answered, it's just beginning. Because the ice would melt. But the cracks in the old order, those were permanent. Christmas Eve dawned quiet and strangely bright, the ice beginning to weep from eaves and branches under a weak winter sun. Slush pooled in gutters, and the air carried that particular post-storm smell, wet earth pine, and a faint metallic tang from stressed power lines. The neighborhood moved slowly like a body recovering from shock. Kids tested the slick sidewalks with cautious delight. Adults shoveled driveways and exchanged subdued greetings over steaming mugs. The emergency HOA meeting was called for that evening, short notice, no festive pretenses. The clubhouse filled quickly, folding chairs scraped across the floor as residents claimed spots along walls and in aisles. Coats stayed on. No one bothered with the usual holiday small talk. The atmosphere felt less like a community gathering and more like a reckoning. Karen arrived 5 minutes late. She slipped through the side door in a charcoal coat, hair pulled back severely, the faint shadow of a bruise still visible at her temple beneath careful makeup. She moved stiffly, shoulder-tender pride, more so, and took her seat at the board table without looking left or right. The room quieted, further conversations dying mid-sentence. Jim Rourke stood notes in hand and wasted no time on pleasantries. Thank you for coming on such short notice, he began, voice steady but stripped of its usual casual warmth. The events of the past week, particularly the accident on December 23rd, have raised profound questions about our winter safety protocols and how we handle resident concerns. He paused, letting the weight settle. Tonight, we will address those questions directly. He outlined the facts with clinical precision: the lack of timely pre-treatment, the repeated removal of a resident-installed warning sign, the emails that had minimized risk, and the crash that could have been far worse. Slides projected behind in my camera stills weather service alerts, screenshots of the thread. No one shifted uncomfortably. They simply watched. Then came the motion. Under Article 7 of our bylaws, Jim continued, I am calling for a vote to remove Vice President Karen Whitmore from the board, effective immediately on grounds of negligence in safety oversight and conduct that undermined community trust. Karen sat motionless, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. The vote was swift. 7 board members, 5 yes, 1 abstention, 1 no. Karen's own. Jim read the result without inflection. As of this moment, Karen Whitmore is no longer a member of the Clearhaven Estates HOA board. A collective exhale moved through the room, not cheers, not gasps, just the quiet release of held breath. Karen rose, slowly gathered her folder and coat, and walked toward the exit. At the door, she paused, hand on the frame, and for the first time looked directly at me across the crowded room. Our eyes met. There was no glare, no defiance left. Only something raw and unreadable recognition, perhaps, or the first glimpse of consequence sinking in. Then she was gone. The meeting dissolved quickly after that. Residents lingered in clusters, voices low, but urgent, already talking about new protocols, resident committees, real change. Several stopped to thank me again. One pressed a tin of homemade cookies into Emily's hands. We drove home under a sky pricked with early stars, the roads wet, but no longer treacherous. 3 months later, on a raw Saturday in late March, an unmarked envelope appeared in our mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just my name typed in plain font. I opened it on the porch, the wind carrying the first hint of spring. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream paper folded once. Caleb, I've watched the footage more times than I care to admit. Not to argue fault, but to understand how completely I missed what was right in front of me. I confused control with competence. I mistook silence for agreement and order for safety. I turned a legitimate warning into something to be managed, mocked, and removed because it threatened the version of this neighborhood I thought I was protecting. You didn't just keep cars from sliding. You forced us all to look at the ice we'd been pretending wasn't there. I wish I had listened before the road made me listen the hard way. I'm sorry. KW. Emily read it over my shoulder in silence. When she finished, she folded it carefully and slipped it into the kitchen drawer where we keep things that matter, but don't need to be displayed. We don't have to forgive her, she said quietly. No, I agreed. But we can keep the apology. Because some cracks once made let light in. And the neighborhood was already brighter for it. January thawed slowly, the ice giving way to muddy patches, and the occasional hopeful croak of frogs in the retention pond. But the neighborhood's temperature had changed in a different way. Conversations at mailboxes lasted longer, eyes lingered on the curve a little more cautiously, and the HOA website, once a ghost town, now saw daily logins. The first official ripple came from an unexpected source. Michael Sorrell, a claims investigator with a calm, precise voice, called me on a gray afternoon in early January. He introduced himself as working for Karen's insurance carrier and asked politely if I would share the raw files from my motion sensor camera. I've seen the county's edited version, he said, but we need the unfiltered originals for liability assessment. I hesitated only a moment. I'll send them. I'd reviewed the footage more times than I cared to count. The 4K infrared feed was unforgiving Karen's Lexus, descending the slope at a prudent speed. No reckless acceleration, no phone in hand, just a careful driver meeting a treacherous surface. The moment the rear tires hit the shadowed patch, the car fishtailed gently at first, then violently. Her brake lights flared, the vehicle rotated 90 degrees, and the driver's side slammed into the pole with a force that snapped the wood like a matchstick. The pole toppled forward in slow, inevitable grace, landing across the hood and roof with a crash that echoed even on silent video. No obstructions, no other vehicles, nothing but black ice, exactly where the sign had stood blinking its warning. I emailed Sorrel the files along with time-stamped photos of the laminated weather alert I'd attached to the post. He thanked me without revealing which way the claim might swing. Within days, the results filtered back through official channels. Karen's policy paid for the car and the pole, but only after denying a portion of the claim on grounds of driver negligence in the face of documented warnings. The HOA, though no longer under her influence, received a formal letter of reprimand from the county roads office for inadequate seasonal hazard mitigation. It wasn't a fine, but it was a black mark, one that would follow them into every future budget discussion. A local news station ran a short segment one evening. Drone footage of the repaired pole, a graphic of the curve, and a voiceover noting that a resident-installed caution sign ordered removed by the Homeowners Association likely prevented additional accidents during the storm. They blurred my name, but neighbors knew. 3 handwritten thank you notes arrived that week. One included a casserole still warm from the oven. Karen remained silent through it all. No posts, no emails, no appearances at the January board meeting where my new winter safety guidelines were adopted unanimously. The document bore my name at the bottom, drafted by Caleb Monroe, Lot 37. Jim Rourke called personally to thank me, voice thick with something like relief. But the final confirmation came from Sorrel himself in a brief follow-up call. She requested the raw footage, he told me. Watched it twice in my office. Didn't argue. Didn't speak until it ended. What did she say? A pause. She said I ignored him, and the road didn't. That was all. I hung up and stood on the porch a long time watching meltwater drip from the eaves. Early March brought the moving truck. It arrived on a Tuesday unannounced. An understated white no company logo. 2 men in plain coveralls. They worked quickly and quietly, loading boxed belongings into the back while shades stayed drawn in Karen's windows. No for sale sign ever appeared in the yard. Rumor had it the house was leased unfurnished to a young family transferring from Charlotte. By late afternoon, the truck pulled away. The driveway sat empty, garage door closed, wreaths long since removed. A single forgotten holiday bough lay flattened on the welcome mat, faded red against the stone. No one gathered to watch. No one waved goodbye. Some said she'd moved to Asheville to stay with a sister. Others heard she'd taken a small apartment up near Boone, needing elevation and distance. A few whispered about stress leave therapy, a quiet unraveling behind closed doors. But no one really knew, and no one asked. The house stood silent through the rest of winter and into a tentative spring. Daffodils pushed up along the walk untended. The mailbox filled with circulars no one collected. One warm Saturday in April, a new family arrived. Parents, 2 small boys, a golden retriever bounding from the back seat. They waved cheerfully as neighbors introduced themselves with casseroles and welcome smiles. The boys raced across the fresh grass, oblivious to the history soaked into the ground. Life moved forward the way it does. But every time I drove past that house, I remembered the woman who once believed perfection could outrank physics. And the night the ice finally spoke louder than her rules. Some lessons arrived gently. Hers came with a crash. October slipped in with a sudden chill the following year, the kind that turns morning breath into fleeting ghosts and paints the maples in urgent reds and golds. One dawn I stood on the porch again, coffee in hand, watching the same low clouds gather as they had 12 months earlier. The air carried that familiar waiting hush. But this time the neighborhood met it differently. 3 days before the first hard freeze, the county's hazard map lit up our curve in bold red. My app, built around the sensors I'd installed, pinged every subscribed phone in Clearhaven Estates with real-time surface temperatures, humidity readings, and a simple alert, black ice possible after 10 p.m. Within hours, residents were out scattering grit from buckets the HOA now supplied at cost. Driveways gleamed with fresh salt. Reflective cones appeared at steep pitches like silent sentries. No mockery, no debates, just preparation. That evening, Lila and I walked the street together on what we'd come to call the ice check. She carried her clipboard like a junior inspector, pink mittens, clutching a checklist she'd designed herself, salt levels, grit piles, warning light batteries, sensor readings. Neighbors waved from porches, offered us cider, asked her opinion on their own preparations. One invited her to help paint a wooden snowflake sign for the community entrance. She accepted with solemn pride. When we reached the infamous curve, She crouched beside the county's permanent diamond sign, caution steep grade, icy conditions possible, and checked the readout on the small solar weather station mounted just beside it. 31 degrees and dropping, she announced. Definite black ice window. She looked up at me, eyes bright. Should I turn on the extra blinkers? I nodded. With a flourish worthy of an engineer twice her age, she flipped the switch. Red LEDs pulsed to life along the county sign's border, a modification the board had approved unanimously after my proposal. At 7:02 p.m., the official county crew rolled through lights, flashing low. They salted curb to curb, paused to inspect drainage. Then the driver leaned out his window. Yours was the first station we checked tonight, he said, tipping his cap. Spot on call. Good work, sir. Sir. The word still caught me off guard, a quiet echo of ranks I'd left behind. But tonight it felt earned not by insignia, but by something simpler: neighbors who finally trusted experience over appearances. Later back home, snow began to fall in fat, lazy flakes. Emily tucked Lila in, while I stood on the porch one last time watching the road shimmer under fresh powder. The lights blinked steadily downhill county sign, and my small station working in tandem, two voices saying the same thing in different languages. I thought about Karen, not with bitterness anymore, just curiosity. Had she found a new neighborhood where rules still felt like armor? Did she slow down now when she saw a homemade sign? Or did she carry that night like a private scar, hidden beneath whatever new life she'd built? Maybe she learned that control isn't leadership, that perfection can't negotiate with physics, that the person dismissed as too intense might be the one keeping the rest of us upright. Or maybe not. Some stories end in redemption, others just end. Ours continued. The following spring, a regional infrastructure journal featured Clearhaven Estates, not for manicured lawns or holiday lights, but for turning an HOA liability into a model of resident-driven hazard prevention. They called it suburban resilience. They quoted Jim Rourke. They didn't need to quote me. The protocols bore my fingerprints. That summer, the board asked me to join them. I declined, but I offered something better: the annual Clearhaven Ice Walk. Every October, I lead new residents, and plenty of old ones, down the streets, teaching them to read frost patterns, spot hidden runoff mix, effective grit, recognize when a slope lies in wait. Lila designs the flyers now. Emily prints them on thick paper, stamped with her hand-drawn snowflake. The first year we had 6 attendees. Last year, 28. Change rarely thunders in. It seeps drip by drip, conversation by conversation, until one day you realize the ground has shifted beneath your feet. Sometimes it takes a crash to wake people. Sometimes it takes proof. And sometimes all it takes is a child checking batteries on a homemade sensor, knowing her father's warning kept someone from sliding into darkness. That's the justice that lasts. Quiet, steady, blinking red in the night when no one else is watching. I keep the bolts tight. I keep the app updated. And every time a car slows at the curve, headlights catching the signs, brake lights glowing soft, I smile. Because they're not just seeing caution markers. They're seeing a story. One that began with a stubborn veteran, a destroyed plywood triangle, and a woman who learned too late that ice doesn't care about emojis. A story about listening before the fall, about speaking up before the crash, about a neighborhood that finally chose safety over silence. Our story. And it's still being written one careful winter at a time.